all wearing fancy suits. The meeting went well, and the financiers agreed to sell the lodge to Giselle, who had already had the 35,000 wired to a local bank. This minor business now settled, the fanciers sat back in their chairs and began to banter about high finance, throwing out that J.P. Morgan, as they knew the man. Finally, one of them noticed the boxer in the corner of the room. Will explained what he was doing there. The financier countered that he too had a boxer in his entourage, whom he named. Well laughed brazenly and explained that his man could easily knock out their man. Conversation escalated into an argument. In the heat of the passion, Will challenged the men to a bet. The financier easily agreed and left to get their man ready for a fight the next day. As soon as they had left, the uncle yelled at Will right in front of Giselle. They did not have enough money to bet, and one of the financiers discovered that this uncle would be fired. Will apologized for getting him into this mess, but he had a plan. He knew the other boxer well, and with a little bribe, they could fix the fight. But where would the money come from for the bet? The uncle replied. Without it, they were as good as dead. Finally, Giselle had heard enough. Unwilling to jeopardize his deal with any ill will, he offered his own 35,000 cash for the bet, part of the bet. Even if he lost, he would wire for more money and still make a profit on the sale of the lodge. The uncle and nephew thanked him. With their own $15,000 and Giselle's $35,000, they would manage to have enough for the bet. That evening, Giselle watched the two boxers rehearse. The fix in the hotel room. His mind reeled at the killings he was going to make from both the boxing match and the sale of the lodge. The fight took place in a gym the next day. Will handled the cash, which was the place for security in a lockbox. Everything was proceeding as planned in the hotel room. The financiers were looking gloom and proceeds as planned in the hotel room. The financier was looking gloom at how badly their fighter was doing. And Giselle was dreaming about the easy money he was about to make. Then suddenly a wild swing by the financier, a fighter hit Gross hard in the face, knocking him down. When he hit the canvas, blood spurted from his mouth. He coughed, then lay still. One of the financiers, a former doctor, checked the pulse. He was dead. The millionaire panicked. Everyone had to get out before the police arrived. They could all be charged with murder. Terrified, Giselle hightailed it out of the gym and back to Chicago, leaving behind $35,000. But he was only too glad to forget, for it seemed a small price to pay to avoid being implicated in a crime. He never wanted to see Will in any other or any of the others again. After Giselle scurried out, Gross stood up under his own steam. The blood that had spurted from his mouth came from the ball filled with chicken blood and hot water that he had hidden in his cheek. The whole affair had been masterminded by Will, better known as the Yellow Kid, one of the most creative con artists in history. Will split out the 35,000 with the financier and the boxer and all fellow con artists, a nice little profit for a few days' work. The interpretation: the yellow kid had staked out Giselle as the perfect sucker long before he set his con up the con. He knew the box and match scam would be the perfect ruse to separate Giselle from his money quickly and definitely. But he also knew that if he had begun trying to interest Giselle in the boxing match, he would have failed miserably. He had to conceal his intentions and switch attention, create a smokescreen, in this case, the sale of the lodge, on the train ride, and in the room of Giselle's mind had been completely accompanied with the pending deal, the easy money, the chance to hobnob with a wealthy man. He had failed to notice that Gross was out of his shape and middle-aged at best. Such is distracting power of a smoke screen. Engrossed in the business deal of Giselle's attention was easily converted into a boxing match, but only at a point when it was already too late for him to notice the details that would have given Gross away. The match, after all, now depended on the bribe rather than on the boxer's physical condition. And Giselle was so distracted at the end by the delusion of the boxer's death that he completely forgot about his money. Learn from the yellow kid. The familiar, inconspicuous front is the perfect screen. Approach your mark with an idea that seems ordinary enough, a business deal, financial intrigue. The sucker's mind is distracted, his suspicion allayed. That is when you genuinely guide him onto the second path, the slippery slope down which he slides helplessly into your trap. Observance of the law. In the mid-1920s, the powerful warlord of Ethiopia were coming to realization that a young man of nobility named Haile Selassie, also known as Ras Taffy, was out competing them all, nearing the point where he could proclaim himself their leader, unifying their country for the first time in decades. Most of his rivals could not understand how this wispy, quiet, mild-mannered man had been able to take control. Yet, in 1927, Selassie was able to summon the warlord at a time to come to Addis Ababa to declare loyalty and recognize him as a leader. Some hurried, some hesitated, but only one, Dejamash Balcha of Sidamo, dared defy Selassie totally. The blustery man Balcha was a great warrior, and he considered the new leader weak and unworthy. He pointedly stayed away from the capital. Finally, Selassie, in his gentle but stern way, commanded Balcha to come. The warlord decided to obey, but in doing so, he would turn the tables on his predator to the Ethiopian throne. He would come as Addis Ababa at his own speed and with an army of 10,000 men, a force large enough to defend himself, perhaps even start a civil war. Stationing this formidable force in a very 3 miles from the capital, he waited as a king would. Salas would have to come to him. Selassie did indeed send emissaries asking Balcha to attend an afternoon banquet in his honor. But Belcher, no fool, knew history. He knew that previous kings and lords of Ethiopia had used banquets as a trap. Once he was there and full of drinks, Salsa would have him arrested or murdered. To signal his understanding of the situation, he agreed to come to the banquet, but only if he could bring his personal bodyguard. 600 of his best soldiers, all armed, ready to defend him and themselves. And Balcha's surprise, Salsa answered with the utmost politeness that he would be honored to play host to such warriors. On the way to the banquet, Balcha warned his soldiers not to get drunk and to be on guard. And when they arrived at the palace, Salsa was charming, his charming best. He deferred to Balcha, treated him as the desperately needed his approval and cooperation. But Balcha refused to be charmed, and he was warned, Salsa, that if he did not return to his camp by nightfall, his army had orders to attack the capital. Selassie reacted as if he was hurt by his mistrust. Over the meal, when it came time for the traditional singing of songs in honor of Ethiopia's leader, he made a point of allowing only songs honoring the warlord of Sedimo. It seems to Balcha that Selassie was scared, intimidated by his great warrior who could not be outwitted. Sensing the change, Balcha believed that he would be the one to call the shots in the days to come. At the end of the afternoon, Balcha and his soldiers began their march back to camp, amidst cheers and gun salutes. Looking back to the capital over his shoulder, he planned his strategy. How his own soldiers would march through the capital in triumph within weeks, and Salsa would be put in his place, and his place being either prison or death. When Balcha came in sight of his camp, however, he saw something was terribly wrong. Where before there had been colorful tents stretching as far as the eye could see, now there was nothing, only smoke from doused fires. What devil's magic was this? A witness told Balcha what happened. During the banquet, a large army commanded by an ally of Salice's had stolen up on Balcha's encampment by a side route he had not seen. This army had not come to fight, however, knowing Balcha would have heard a noisy battle. Hurried back with his 600 body men, Salsa had armed his own troops with baskets of gold and cash. They had surrounded Balcha's army and proceeded to purchase every last one of their weapons. Those who refused were easily intimidated. Within a few hours, Balcha's entire force had been disarmed and scattered in all directions. Realizing his danger, Balcha decided to march south with his 600 soldiers to regroup. But the same army that had disarmed his soldiers blocked his way. The other way out was to march on the capital. But Salsa had set a large army to defend it. Like a chess player, he had predicted Balcha's moves and checkmated him. For the first time in his life, Balcha surrendered. To repent his sins of pride and ambition, he agreed to enter the monastery. Interpretation. Throughout Salsa's long reign, no one could quite figure him out. Ethiopians, like their leader, fierce, but Salsa, who wore the front of a gentle, peace-loving man, lasted longer than any of them. Never angry or impatient, He lured his victims with sweet smiles, lulling them with charm and obsequiousness before he attacked. In the case of Bacha, Salsa played on the man's wariness, his suspicion that the banquet was a trap, which in fact it was, but not the one he expected. Salsa's way of allaying Bacha's fears, letting him bring his bodyguards to the banquet, giving them top billing there, making him feel in control, created a thick smoke screen concealing the real actions 3 miles away. Remember, the paranoid and wary are often the easiest to deceive. When the trust in one area, you have a smoke screen that blinds their view in another, letting you creep up and level them with a devastating blow. A helpful or apparently honest gesture, or one that implies the other person's superiority. These are perfect diversionary devices. Properly set up, the smokescreen is a weapon of great power. It enables the gentle Salisi to totally destroy his enemy without firing a single bullet. Do not underestimate the power of Tafari. He creeps like a mouse, but he has a jaws like a lion. Bacha Sidamos, last words entering into the monastery. Keys to power. If you believe that the deceivers are colorful folk who mislead with elaborate lies and tales, you are greatly mistaken. The best deceiver utilizes a bland, inconspicuous front that calls no attention to themselves. They know that extravagant words and gestures immediately raise suspicions. Instead, they envelop their mark in familiar, the banal, the harmless. In Yellow Kid Wells dealing with Sam Giesel, the familiar was a business deal. In Ethiopia's case, the South Seas misleading obsequiousness, exactly what Boucher would have expected from a weaker warlord. Once you have lured your sucker attention with the familiar, they will not notice the deception being perpetrated behind their backs. This derives from a simple truth. People can only focus on one thing at a time. It is really too difficult for them to imagine that the bland and harmless person that are dealing with is simultaneously setting up something else. The grayer the more uniform the smoke in your the grayer and more uniform the smoke in your smoke screen, the better it conceals your intentions. In the decoy and red herring devices discussed in part 1, you actively distract people in the smoke screen. You lure your victims. Draw them into your web because it is so hypnotic that this is often the best way of concealing your intentions. The simplest form of a smoke screen is facial expressions. Behind a bland, unreadable exterior, all sorts of mayhem can be planned without detection. This is a weapon that most powerful men in history have learned to perfect. It was said that no one could read Franklin D. Roosevelt's face. Baron James Rothschild made a lifelong practice of disguising his real thoughts behind bland smiles of a barometer. Henry Kissinger, who bore his opponents around the negotiating table to tears with his monotonous voice, his blank look, his endless recitation of details. Then, as their eyes glazed over, he would suddenly hit them with a list of bold terms. Caught off guard, they would be easily intimidated. As one poker manual explains, while playing his hand, the good player is seldom an actor. Instead, he practices a bland behavior that minimizes readable patterns, frustrations, and opponents permits greater concentration. As adaptable concept, the smokescreen can be practiced on a number of levels, all playing on the psychological principles of distraction and misdirection. One of the most effective smokescreens is the noble gesture. People want to believe apparently noble gestures are genuine, for the belief is pleasant. They rarely notice how deceptive these gestures can be. The art dealer Joseph Duveen was once confronted with a terrible problem. The millionaires who had paid so dearly for Duveen's paintings were running out of wall space, and with inheritance taxes getting ever higher, it seemed unlikely that they would keep buying. The solution was the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., which Duveen helped create in 1937 by getting Andrew Mellon to donate his collection to it. The National Gallery was the perfect front for Duveen. In one gesture, his clients avoided taxes, cleared wall space for new purchases, and reduced the number of paintings on the market, maintaining upward pressure on the prices. All this while the donors created the appearance of being public benefactors. Another effective smokescreen is the pattern, the establishment of a series of actions that seduce the victim into believing you will continue in the same way. The pattern plays on the psychology of anticipation. Our behavior conforms to patterns, or so we like to think. In 1878, the American's robber baron J. Gould created a company that began to threaten the monopoly of telegraph company Western Union. Directors of the Western Union decided to buy Gould's company. They had to spend a hefty sum, but they figured that they had managed to rid themselves of an irritating competitor. A few months later, though, Gould was at it again, complaining he had been treated unfairly. He started up a second company to compete with Western Union, and his new acquisition, the same thing happened again. Western Union bought him out, shut him up. Soon the pattern began for the third time, but now Gould went for the jugular. He suddenly staged a bloody takeover struggle and managed to gain complete control of Western Union. He had established a pattern that had tricked the company director into thinking his goal was to be bought out at a handsome rate. Once they paid him off, they relaxed and failed to notice that he was actually playing for higher stakes. The pattern is powerful in that it deceives the other person into expecting the opposite of what you're really doing. Another psychological weakness on which to construct smokescreen is the tendency to mistake appearances for reality. The feeling that if someone seems to belong to your group, their belonging must be real. This habit makes the seamless blend very effective front. The trick is simple. You simply blend in with those around you. The better you blend, the less suspicious you become. During the Cold War of the 1950s and 60s, and is now notorious, a slew of British civil servants passed secrets to the Soviets. They went undetected for years because they were apparently decent chaps, had gone all the right schools and fit the old boy network perfectly. Blending in is the perfect smokescreen for spying. The better you do it, the better you can conceal your intentions. Remember, it takes patience and humility to dull your brilliant colors. To put on the mask of the unconscious, do not despair at having to wear such a bland mask. It is often your unreadability that draws people to you and makes you appear a person of power. Imagine a sheepskin. A sheep never marauders. A sheep never deceives. A sheep is magnificently dumb and docile. With the sheepskin on its back, a fox can pass right into the chicken's coop. Have you ever heard of a skillful general who intends to surprise a citadel, announcing his plan to his enemy? Conceal your purpose and hide your progress. Do not disclose the intent of your design until they cannot be opposed. Until the combat is over. Win the victory before you declare the war. In a word, intimidate those war intim win the victory because you declare the war. In a word, intimidate those like people whose designs are not known except by ravaged country do they have passed. 9 on the Clause 1962 to 1706. Reveal. No smokescreen, red herring, false sincerity, or any other diversionary device will succeed in concealing your intentions. If you already have established reputation for deception, and as you get older and achieve success, it often becomes increasingly difficult to disguise your cunning. Everyone knows your practice deception. Persistence in playing naive, you run the risk of seeming the rankest hypocrite, which will severely limit your room to maneuver. In such cases, it is better to own up, to appear honest rogue, or better than the repentant rogue. Not only will you be admired for your frankness, but most wonderful, strange of all, you will be able to continue to stratagems. Stratagems, like strategizing. As P.T. Barnum, the 19th century king of humbuggery, grew older, he learned to embrace his reputation as a grand deceiver. At one point, he organized a buffalo hunt in New Jersey, complete with Indians and a few imported buffalo. He publicized the hunt as genuine, but it came off as so completely fake, the crowd, instead of getting angry and asking for their money back, was greatly amused. They knew Barnum pulled tricks all the time. This was the secret of success, and they loved him for it. Learning a lesson from this affair, Barnum stopped concealing all of his. Kierkegaard wrote, "The world wants to be deceived." Finally, although it is wiser to divert attention from your purpose by preventing a bland, familiar exterior, there are times when the colorful, conspicuous gesture is right diversionary tactic. The great charlatan mountebanks of 17th and 18th century Europe used humor and entertainment to deceive their audience. Dazzled by a great show, the public would not notice the charlatan's real intentions. Thus, the star charlatan himself would appear in town in a night black coach drawn by black horses. Clowns, tightrope walkers, and star entertainers would accompany him, pulling people in his direction. In his demonstration of elixirs and quack potions, the charlatan made entertainment seem like business of the day. The business of the day was actually the sale of the elixir. And quack and a quack potions. Spectacle and entertainment clearly are excellent devices to conceal your intentions, but they cannot be used indefinitely. The public grows tired and suspicious and eventually catches on to the trick. And indeed, the charlatans had to move quickly from town to town before word spread that their potions were useless and the entertainment a trick. A powerful people with bland exterior, on the other hand, the Talleyrand's and the Rothschilds and the Celestis can practice their deceptions in the same place throughout their lifetime. Their act never wears thin and rarely causes suspicions. The colorful smoke screen should be used cautiously and then only when the occasion is right.